Welcome to the Borderlands Trail and Ultra Running Podcast. My name is Josh. I'm the host. I'm the founder of Borderlands. I love doing this podcast, and today is a snapshot of why I love it, because there are two people that are prepared to talk today with me that I just met for the first time. And among all of the luxuries of this sport, the gifts that this sport gives us is sometimes there's just a ability to have an instant connection with someone you've never met before, because we have both suffered in various ways, in different ways, out on the trails, and today's no different. So my guest today is Zoe and Kylie from Your Diet Sucks. I think this is going to be a fun conversation with them, so glad that you're here with me today. There we go. Borderlands. Today we're going to be talking diet. We're going to be talking. I mean, it's something that I often have issues with, and I talked with various friends about, like fueling in the race. Like, what are the misconceptions? What are the things that we care about that we maybe don't need to care about as much? And what are the things that we don't know about that maybe would be great to have on our radar? And that could, as if you're like me and you don't think about nutrition a ton, what could be some things that we could do that would give us, a notable or marked change just by, flipping a few switches. We always talk about like love of running on this podcast, but to get into like improving it, it is directly connected and, let's say, even correlated with loving it more. And so if we could do better out on the trail, maybe we would even love this sport even more. At least that's what I'd hope for me. So today, Zoe, Kylie, welcome. I'm glad that you're here with me. We are separated by many, many miles. You're in Colorado and I'm in France, but technology brings us together. I'm glad that you're here.
Happy to be here. Wish we could trade. Would love to be in Paris.
Yeah, I would love to be in Colorado right now. I mean, don't tell my Utah friends that. I'd rather be in Utah. I love Utah more, but I miss the mountains. I miss the Mountain West quite a bit.
It's pretty special out here. We live in a place where you can cross country ski, ice climb, alpine ski, go on a walk, climb a mountain, all before your lunch break.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, can you hit with the high level of Your Diet Sucks? Like the podcast, I've seen it a lot. I've seen both of you on a lot of podcasts lately, but bring us in to your world of Your Diet Sucks and help me and my listeners understand what you do.
So just like you said, our mission is to unfuck how people eat, because we've noticed Kylie's a registered dietitian nutritionist. I'm a running journalist and elite athlete in eating disorder recovery, that there's a lot of narratives around food that are not particularly helpful for athletes. There's a lot of myths and misconceptions and pseudoscience. And what we wanted to do was to offer a counter narrative. We wanted to explore one story at a time, the mistakes that we as runners and athletes and people who enjoy movement tend to make. So each episode explores a specific different topic. Maybe we're talking about the history of fasting, and we start with like the religious tradition of fasting. We go all the way to the current day practices of fasting for better fat utilization, in heavy quotation marks there. Or we'll explore social media influencers, and we start with how gladiators used to sell wine and olive oil, and we end at the fact that myths and misconceptions spread faster on social media than nutrition truths do. So we always want to keep one foot firmly planted in the science and another one firmly planted in the cultural and like the emotional story that causes us to make the decisions that we make, because it's not all, I know we all like to think we're really rational, but we all make decisions for a myriad of complicated reasons. And we wanted to examine both sides of that equation.
Yeah. I mean, for me, when I think about being in the middle of a race, I start to have ideas about what I should eat that really, I mean, and Kylie, I'd be curious your take on this. Like on some levels, it's like, okay, I'm listening to my body. Like, okay, do I want sweet? Do I want salt? Do I want this? But then on the other hand, I just start to think of like, I lose my mind and I'm making horrible decisions on what to eat. Or I think, I don't need to eat this hour. And then all of a sudden it's been 8 hours and I haven't eaten anything. I'm really bad at this sport. Don't be too shocked. Like we'll pull on that thread if we want to. But so Kylie, what are some of the misconceptions? Like, what are things that runners think are good? You talk about how misconceptions spread faster than truths. Like, what are some of the things that you think ultra runners are into right now that aren't serving them?
Well, I think you bring up a good point. Like a lot of trail runners and ultra runners that I work with think that, oh, maybe I don't really like I'm not good enough to really focus on my nutrition. So, I'll just wing it and do whatever.
Yeah.
And in working in practice with people, I think having them have a little bit of structure and a little bit of understanding around like what can make up a fueling plan and like, oh, actually, I can feel good or better doing this by having something a little more structured can be really helpful. That immediately came to mind when you were talking about yourself. But
Yeah.
as far as like misconceptions go, there are various things that come up in the world that like, for instance, fueling plan wise, like this raw milk trend that was going around, people at the Cocodona race using raw milk as a fuel source. And then in our current political climate, raw milk is being promoted a lot, and
Bird flu's back, baby.
It's something that it really doesn't have a lot of science behind it, and the thought of
significant science showing that it's pretty useless. So we have some good evidence.
Milk is gross to me. Can you bring me up to speed? I do remember seeing people pouring milk on themselves last Cocodona and such, but this is perfect. Bring me up to speed on that because I'm not paying attention.
It's hypothesized that there are hypothesized in the fact that there is research looking at this, and it does there is no demonstrable positive impact from drinking raw milk, but there's a subset of people who believe that pasteurization destroys some amount of the natural enzymes present in milk that they believe the enzymes are beneficial to human health, particularly gut health. That has not been validated in the research, but there are some risks of getting bird flu amongst other little nasty.
Oh, so that was a legit joke. Like that bird flu comes from.
Yeah. You can get bird flu from it.
Okay, so who's of the two of you? I don't want to name names, but I know who's pouring milk on themselves. I remember now. Who's offering the hot take? Is it the raw milk? Is that the hot take, or is the Louis Pasteur really saved everybody's life? Let's go with pasteurized
I'm
milk.
very pro Louis Pasteur, but I think that something people will find when they tune into Your Diet Sucks is there is besides I did come out a few weeks ago profoundly neutral or not very pro banana bread and got absolutely raked across social media coals by our audience. I'm so sorry. I apologize for thumbing my nose at banana bread, but overall, it's pretty. I feel like we sometimes start with a hot take and then we end up with a much more complicated, nuanced view of things because on so many of these stories, there are multiple sides and multiple perspectives worth considering. So even though sometimes we start with a hot take, it usually ends up in a much more sort of nuanced place.
Yeah. That's what. So I do an episode here pretty regularly with my friend Brian Peterson, and it's Bad Runner's Take, and the idea is. If we don't at least talk about it out loud, sometimes we have really awful ideas in our head and we don't know it. And we're not talking nutrition, but this is to your point of if I don't ever say out loud, drinking melted butter is great, at mile 80, maybe that's a stupid thing I might believe. God, I just need butter at this next aid station. And if you don't say it out loud, then you can't be corrected. And so sometimes the culture, at least we have to be able to pour the milk on ourselves so that someone else can be like, hey, bird flu is real.
Yeah.
Well, the challenge too is that we did an episode about diet cults as well, and people kind of cling to these certain ideas to feel like they're a part of something, and so even saying it out loud, that might be a declaration of I'm part of this crowd.
Yeah.
Counterintuitively, people actually gravitate towards much more extreme and strict diets, partially because of social media will always incentivize the most extreme out there version of something. It's not enough to just drink milk during your 250 miler. You got to get the funkiest shit you can find on the black market kind of milk. And people need structure and need community in their lives. And like you said, the choices that we have on a day-to-day basis about how to eat, much less as athletes when you throw in pre-run, post-run, during run, fueling. That's a lot of choices, and it can be really overwhelming and it can be scary. And it's so tempting to cede those decisions to a belief system. It's so easy to cede them to an influencer, to a guru, to someone who says, I have the answer. And if you eat the way I eat, you'll run like I run and you'll look like I look. But unfortunately, that's usually not how things operate. However, I do think it is interesting to examine that very, very human impulse to be told what to do, to have a way of being handed down to us, and to belong to something bigger than ourselves, because it's hard to have a community around just drinking dairy. But you can have a community around this like sort of outlaw bandit dairy that we're seeing arise.
Totally. You know, I think in general, it's easy. So sometimes we don't go down the nuance path because it's easier, obviously, not to, but at the same time, it's like, nuance doesn't, you have to want it. You have to want, like, it's so nice if someone just says, and meat only is the way to go. Or vegan, like everything, no meat ever. Like, it's just easier. Like, to use your word, like the cult thing of it's like you can go in and belong, but there's this reality of nuance that we don't always get into. And if I'm picking up on, like, that's where you'll go start to play, is in this nuance space. So with the milk thing, because this is a great example, is there any, like, I mean, gosh, milk is so gross to me. I would never drink it alone. But what about pasteurized milk? Is that something that would be of value in a race? That just feels like vomit ready to happen.
Exactly. That's the thing, is that, you know, it's not something that I would recommend as a source of fuel during a race. It has a small amount of carbohydrate in it, protein and fat. And I would say, like, when we're looking at performance, we want to have more carbohydrate than protein and fat. A little bit might be okay in an ultra, but that piece, and then the lactose, just in general, I mean, a lot of people have a hard time digesting lactose as it is, like when you're not running.
Right.
So when you're running, it just sounds like a GI disaster for me. And the like heat and milk just sound like disgusting to me.
Some people really just like to play ultras on hard mode, GI wise.
Okay, so for all those, and I appreciate you, like, trying to find, like, okay, here's some things that you might be able to get, but all those things that you just mentioned, what are better versions of those for mid race? You know what I mean? Like, what would be the thing that would actually, yes, instead of, like, where's the, you know, the best bang for your buck on, maybe you're not super hungry, you're only thirsty, but you need fuel. Like, what's your starting point of recommendation on that?
Yeah. You know, we have hydration mixes that have carbohydrates in them, as well as, like, there are some companies that make high carbohydrate mixes that are more concentrated and can bring you in more carbohydrate in a smaller amount of fluid.
Do you have a particular go-to that you recommend over others? I mean, we could name names here unless you don't want to.
Well, there's like pretty much two higher carb brands right now, like the Morton and the Scratch high carb.
Okay.
And they both kind of have a thick, like a little bit of a thicker jelly-like texture. That's all I can explain it as. So depending on the person, like, I do have some athletes that can't tolerate the texture of those things. So that's where, like, maybe a regular Scratch option or Tailwind or something might be better for people. So that's where, like, dialing this in ahead of time and trying to experiment with different things can be a great way to dial in your fueling plan before a race. And even like soda in the middle of an ultra or something, like if you really feel like you need some carbohydrate, is not a bad option. Maybe not overdoing it. Like if somebody takes soda and fruit, and like there's not to get too sciencey, but like there are multiple types of sugars that you can kind of take in and tolerate at a time, and taking in too much of something like fructose, which might be found in soda and fruit, might upset your stomach. So like there are different nuances with even like drink options that you choose or food options that you choose that could result in a GI disaster or a performance breakthrough.
So when you're working with a runner building out their plan with all of those options and, picking the right sugars and all that sort of stuff. And, do you go high carb? Do you go low? But like when it's race time, are you building out like, okay, for you, this person, for Zoe, for you, when you're at mile 80, and if you're feeling this way, grab this, or you know what I mean? Like, because for me, the hardest thing in the middle of the race is truly to have a right mind. And so I can't be like, I wouldn't be able to parse that out,
Yeah, and that is kind of what I'm doing with people, like with some of the elites that I work with, like we'll have it pretty dialed between crew areas or aid stations, like exactly what they're going to carry, maybe not exactly what they're going to take every single hour, but they have options in like taste and variety and drink mix and all that kind of stuff. And then they can take what they want within that time period, like they're trying to consume all the things that they have. And then we also create like backup plans. So if they're feeling a certain way or need something from an aid station, we already like have parsed that out ahead of time. So they're like, okay, this is what I grab, or this is what I need to do in this situation. And that can apply to anyone that's trail running and racing ultras. Like, you deserve to also have your fueling plan dialed and know like what are the options that are going to work for me and at mile 80.
Yeah. Zoe, have you ever just royally destroyed your nutrition plan and still got a good result in an ultra?
Yeah. At Leadville this year, the gels that I've been using for like 6 years randomly, just like, it was a hot day, altitude, stress. I was flying pretty close to the sun. I buzzed through an aid station and didn't pick up hydration what I probably should have because I was just vibing too hard, which big mistake. Ended up drinking some ditch water to make up for it. So
did you have like the life straw or something?
No, I just drank dish water.
Great. So, that's kind of like raw milk.
Don't have GR. It's nature's raw milk.
Nature's raw milk.
I know. I'm gonna sit here like dunking on people that drink raw milk for 15 minutes, and I'm just like straight
drinking from the river.
Water out of Leadville. It's like just mining tailings. But I, got off with my hydration, and about 50K into Leadville, I got like incredibly sick and projectile vomited everywhere. And for the rest of the day, it was much harder for me to fuel than it ever has been. But thankfully, I had worked with Kylie to incorporate some like whole food fuels, which I normally don't do in races. I tend to just like the really quick, fast carb things. But I was able to sort of pivot to a more potato-based program. And I'll use like recovery mixes throughout races as well to get like that hit of high carb and just like a little bit of fat and protein to help me feel a bit fuller, but you can get in a little more nutrition, particularly I find I can get in a little more nutrition, particularly at altitude when it's in liquid form. And so between potatoes, carb drink, and recovery mix, I was able to, piece together, like, I was aiming for like 80, 85 grams of carbohydrate an hour, but I was rocking like 65, 70, which is like for plan B, not terrible.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
And, was able to come in second. So potatoes, thank you. Sponsor me.
Okay. I mean, that's Idaho, sponsor of the state.
Get at me.
I don't talk to elite runners very often. Is that, common in, just my perception of the elite runner is that it's so dialed on race day. Like you're so dialed. But what I'm hearing from you is that on race day, you have sort of a plan A and a plan B. Is that kind of what it was? Like your plan A is like keeps you light and fast. It's the gels, it's liquid. But if that falls apart, you know that you can go here or there.
Yeah. And I'd worked with Kylie. Like, she always has folks, like, she helped me get ready for Leadville, and she always has folks start practicing like months before the race, so that it's like not even that, like, I had already done many long runs, even practicing with my plan B potatoes. So like, it's still something that like my body was familiar and comfortable with. I knew I could fuel with it at altitude and when it was hot. And I felt pretty, I mean, I did have Kylie on my crew, so that made it pretty easy and
helps,
comfortable as well. But
Yeah.
I had like gamed out in a spreadsheet so that I knew exactly how many grams of carbohydrate I was getting, whether I was eating potatoes or tater tots, mashed potatoes, or gels. I knew exactly how many electrolytes I was getting. So I didn't have to do a ton of the math in my head because I had already sort of like gamed out and knew exactly what I was doing, rather than just running into an aid station and panic eating a bunch of like pickle juice or something. Which I think knowing that you have a plan B that's not just like, okay, throw caution to the wind, but is one that I still like knew how much nutrition I was getting, because especially at altitude, when you're trying to race, the margin for error on those things is pretty slim.
Yeah. Kylie, did you have the potatoes, or was this just at aid stations and you kind of like take a survey and be like, okay, here's what we can replace with?
Oh no, we had them made ahead of time.
Oh yeah.
So plan B was ready to go. So then what I'm hearing is that either people who work with you, Kylie, or elite athletes are carrying their plan B, their crews carry their plan B with them.
Sometimes. I mean, sometimes people, their plan B is at aid stations. Like some portion of races will like publish ahead of time what's going to be at aid stations. And if somebody has like a pretty solid stomach, I think there are certain things that would be good options for people, and they might practice with like the tortilla with honey or something, and then the aid station might have tortilla with honey as well, and so that's an option in case something happens where they don't have it. Or like carrying extra things as well might be an option, but sometimes people want to like balance out the weight with what they're doing as well.
Yeah. I mean, the average ultra aid station has all the food that we would blame on America being the sickest country in the world. Is there anything there though? I mean, because this is where we're really going to have some live fact checking, because I'm going to get some words wrong here. But there's so like Coca-Cola. I don't drink it outside of an ultra, but in an ultra, I might drink it. Is that because some of that junk food actually can work as fuel in an ultra because your body is using it instantly? It's not just going into your body and you're overeating the sugar and you're overeating stuff, like you're instantly metabolizing it. Is that why that's okay, or are we just justifying it?
Your blood sugar and your insulin response is totally different and in fact blunted when you're running. So I think a mistake that a lot of people make is they get afraid of eating sugar and they get afraid of eating calories while they're running, even though A, you desperately need it in those scenarios, and B, your body experiences it totally differently. Like, eating, I'm not going to sit at my desk and crush like 90 grams of carb an hour and expect to feel good. However, in a race, like having trained my gut, I can get pretty close to there. And that's because our whole like metabolic response to it is different. And I think it's also really important to talk about like not stigmatizing those foods, particularly in the context of athletic performance, because so often we see athletes who are afraid to eat carbs or eat sugar, and they're afraid that like I mean, I'll speak for myself when I say that like after running an ultra, I have no desire to eat anything sweet for a while, right? I'm not having to like hold myself back at the aid station table. Like clearly these foods, we experience them differently metabolically and psychologically when we're eating them during an ultra. And I think that taking those caveats should encourage people to be maybe a little bit braver with practice in terms of how they fuel their ultras.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, what are there any others as awesome as the milk example? Are there some other things out there that are floating around that you think, oh, come on, please don't do that?
Well, there's been the fasting craze.
Tell me about that.
Where people, I have a lot of athletes that are like, I don't eat before I go and train or race. Because I want to optimize, like tap into my fat oxidation rates and trying to make those better so that I can go longer in ultras.
You'll definitely be going longer. You'll be out there significantly longer.
Really slowing things down here.
Yeah. I'll save you a burger at the finish line, guys.
I think that's one. And then there's the in the ultra scene, the like low carb the low carb, high fat diets that
Oh,
people are doing to try to have a similar effect with like improving fat oxidation rates.
okay.
But we know that those can have some serious downsides for people in regards to like over the long term, it affecting people negatively from a bone health perspective, a thyroid perspective, and just overall can
Oh,
lead people down a path of like relative energy deficiency in sport, like just not consuming enough nutrition, especially with like intermittent fasting and like only having small windows of time where you can consume your nutrition to fuel your like ultra training. And then with the low carb, high fat diets, yeah, just seeing like I'm working with a couple of male athletes right now that are trying to get out of that dietary like habit that they have because they actually feel quite terrible and
hmm.
have some negative health implications that have come from engaging in the diet for a couple of years
Oh, interesting.
like their metabolism has actually gone down and they have low testosterone, and so
Hmm.
trying to kind of get the like switch over to a like kind of a more periodized carb intake like based on training
And
is the approach that I'm transitioning some people to.
yeah, is there like a baseline starting point, and knowing that every athlete then is going to function different after the baseline, but is there like I'm going to forget what they all are. Like, so, on average, you want to have a balance of protein and carbs and sugar. What's the starting point that even if we don't have the luxury of a nutritionist that we can say, hey, just like, what's a good baseline to aim for that would be useful or helpful to me to improve my running 0.5%, 1%.
Yeah, I mean, eating regular meals and snacks, that's a place to start.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, that is
yeah,
revolutionary to some degree. Like, to be very honest with you, like that does
yeah.
feel
Truly.
like
Like,
No,
some.
and I mean, I do have athletes, like I always explain, thinking about like how your day is set up and dividing your day up into thirds, which actually allows some flexibility for my athletes that don't really like 3 meals a day. Like if
Mm,
you have windows of time where even if you're getting like 3 snacks in a window and then 2 meals the rest of the day, like that can be helpful for people. So there
mm,
is some flexibility there. It doesn't have to be like 3 meals and 3 snacks a day, but setting up some structure for yourself, I think, can be really helpful. And then um, within that, I actually find that, like, just kind of what you're saying, like checking the boxes at meals, like, do I have a protein source, a carb source, a fat source, and a fruit and or vegetable source at
hmm.
the meal can really help, like, just getting that balance in. And then with snacks, like choosing snacks that are balanced, like maybe have two macronutrients in them, like a carb and a protein, carb and a fat, fat and a protein, and making those kind of choices for yourself to cover your macronutrient bases. And our macronutrients provide us with our calories, our energy. So overall, like trying to think in that way is simplistic, but it does help people get to like a baseline kind of thing. And then where it really becomes tricky though is like with increased training volume and intensity, like our needs go up and they can go up significantly. And everyone has different body frame size. So it that is the part where people can unintentionally underfuel because they're like, well, I'm eating regularly. But if you don't understand your portions and things that you need to get in, that can make it kind of difficult to get you to your overall like energy needs for the day.
Mm, yeah. So, I mean, as a follow up to some degree, like I wish this was my approach. I wish it's a lifestyle change. Like, I'm going to eat well as a lifestyle. But the reality is that I tend to eat well leading up to my desired ultra. And then I essentially have an off season, and where I make changes to what I eat, and they are generally not better changes, if that makes sense. So I would think that the answer would be, well, lifestyle. You make a lifestyle change and eat well all the time. the reality is what do you see in runners? Like how do you coach them to think about food, not as in training season or out of training season, or is it okay to think that way?
I would say it's complex because
Yeah.
I guess it depends on, out of training season, like, are you still training or like, are you doing nothing? That's a question. I mean,
Yeah,
your
that's fair.
dietary needs do change if you're exercising or not exercising. And then, some of my athletes are like, go full on strength training mode at certain times too. And like, that can change your nutrition a bit as well.
Yeah.
I think one of the questions that I do ask people though is like, are you being too overly like strict or kind of have a lot of rules like when you're leading up to a race, and then when you do that, after you do that race, you feel like, oh, that was like way too like restrictive for me, so I'm just gonna like do whatever. And so encouraging people to think about like how they have their nutrition structured. Is it helpful to do that in the lead up to a race and then just like do nothing after that? Or like, is there a different approach that we could take that might feel better? And actually that's kind of like one of the themes of our podcast too, is examining like some of the narratives that we have around food and fueling. And is it something that is productive to do that, or like maybe not?
And we're always trying to push people to broaden the lens on what they think health is. Because I think as athletes, so often we're like, okay, health, that just is like, how fast am I going to be able to run tomorrow? How much am I going to be able to lift? That is what health is. Health is supplements and protein shakes and restricting carbohydrates and counting calories and logging all my activity on Strava and having everything dialed to the T. And I would argue that that's not actually a super healthy way to move about the world, understanding that everyone is allowed to do what they want with their body and sort of operate within whatever framework feels right to them. But I always push back and say, like, well, why doesn't your perspective of health also include mental health and social health? Because you can be too healthy when it comes to diet. We actually have an episode about orthorexia, which is the non-clinical term referring to a fixation on health and the cleanliness and purity of your food to the detriment of your health, which is something we see not uncommonly as people get really hyper fixated on a really narrow definition of health as just being like hitting their macros or hitting a calorie count and like quantifying everything. And then while they can't go out to eat with their friends, they can't eat with their family, they feel incredibly anxious if they can't micromanage everything on their plate. And we want to push people to understand health in a much more comprehensive way. Like, how does your food like go just beyond how you fuel yourself? How does it help you connect with your community? Like, you live in Paris, and I would say if you can't walk to a pastry shop and get a croissant, my definition of health has a lot of pastries in it. And so, like, being able to just sort of like have a bigger picture of like, how does food help with other aspects of my social, mental
great point.
health as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because when I tend to think about food in a restrictive way, it's applied to running. But then when I think about food as like a means of community, like, I love running. Running is so good for me, but also a great meal with good friends. And this brings me to the next point too, is like, where does alcohol fit in for runners, and how should runners think about it? Like, if I were to abstain from alcohol, am I going to perform better? Do I perform better if I drink more alcohol? I'm curious your take on that.
Well, disappointingly, there's not a ton of evidence suggesting that increasing your alcohol consumption is beneficial. But we actually do have an episode about alcohol and athletics, and we try to, again, leave people in a more curious place. We are not overly, to a lot of people's disappointment, we're not overly prescriptive. And with alcohol, that's one of those things that I think people need to make really educated and careful considerations about, because I think that, the evidence it's not beneficial for training. That's for sure. But I think that, the way that it's become talked about in athletic circles a lot of times isn't very nuanced. And all we hear is a lot of people shouting about cutting out alcohol. Alcohol is poison. Alcohol is terrible. And I think that it's worth examining the function that alcohol often serves, and how can we maybe not use, if people want to, how can they maybe eschew the substance, but still like understand like, well, oftentimes this can serve as like that social connective tissue. So what can I substitute in its place? Because I think so often we see people like cut out alcohol, and with that, they cut out social connection, and they cut out like meeting up with folks. And I'm not saying you have to meet up with folks around alcohol, but I think that recognizing that the reason that substance has been so sticky for us is because it has historically served some really vital functions.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd read this book once. It was, it's a really awful name for a book that was so good, and it was called The Easy Way to Quit Alcohol. And it's this Easy Way series of this guy who works through like, it's a different approach to AA. And the thinking with AA was, I am an alcoholic, even if I don't drink, that I am still an alcoholic. And his approach was, you can be free from that, and you can no longer be bound to that. I'm just making observations here. Like, AA has been a tremendous gift to a lot of people, not judging that. But to your point, a lot of the Easy Way book was like, hey, to your point, Zoe, you can completely abstain from alcohol, and then you can still go out with your friends and just not drink alcohol. Like that's possible, but unfortunately for some it may not be. And so you're exactly right. Alcohol is so deeply tied to our human connection, even separate from running, that is the scariest part for some people, I think, to say, well, if I can tie it to my running, and I can't drink because I'm running, and maybe you have that community over there, but it becomes scary outside of running. Like if I don't have alcohol, will I lose my friends? Well, maybe they're not good friends anyway, if that's the only way they'll hang out with you. But to your point of other areas, because as runners, I think we get so obsessed with our running, and everything else suffers as a result. And I think what I hear is more of a call for balance.
Yeah. And, I'm speaking outside of the framework of substance use disorders, which is a completely different thing. And I'm more speaking to folks who are like, that just have a different relationship to these substances. And we actually just did a podcast looking at the science of sugar addiction. And oftentimes the thing that with sugar specifically, it doesn't necessarily hijack our reward system in the way that we're told it does, unless you restrict it. So there is a thing about human psychology where we actually can, and again, this is outside of the framework of substance use, but when you take something away, when you say it's off limits, when you say, I can't have cookies, or I can't have I can't have candy, I can't have dessert, or I can't have like a certain class of food, that's actually what triggers making our dopamine response to it significantly stronger, is the deprivation. And so that's why we're always really, again, outside of the framework of substance use, really careful in terms of eliminating things from diets, restricting things from diets, saying that things are off limits. This isn't clean enough, or this isn't good enough. And because those narratives actually make those substances so much brighter and shinier. And that's actually when it does start to hijack our psychology in ways that I, as a person, am not totally comfortable with. And as someone in eating disorder recovery, any narrative around restriction or elimination is inherently pretty fraught for me. Because the second I tell myself I can't have something, that's when it becomes extremely attractive.
Own your mind,
to obsess and fixate about it. And so I think that a lot of times people, when something is sticky for them, or they're I really want this and I'm uncomfortable at how much I want it, it sometimes causes them to make less educated decisions about that substance.
Yeah. So I mean, it's clearly a gray area, except for maybe mile 80. Don't
chug a beer. Yeah.
No shots at mile 80. Okay.
Yeah, we also discovered it is not illegal to use alcohol in running competition, but it is in power boating. So careful, power boaters.
Oh man, gosh. Yeah. All the power boaters out there.
I know you have a ton of power boating in your audience.
I'm strong in the power boating community. Yeah. Well, hey, this has been awesome. I could honestly go on and on about this. I'm just so curious about so many aspects in this. I think maybe just to wind it down, a question for each of you. Zoe first. Congrats on the second place at Leadville last year. Do you have similar ambition this year? Are you signed up for, like, what's your 2025 going to look like?
Right now I'm training for the UTMB Chianti, which I'm pumped to go race.
Hell yes.
over in Italy.
Chianti, yes, is the most amazing.
Speaking of
It's my favorite place in the world. Yes, and the incredible wine.
Yeah, excited to go sample a few wines over there.
Yes.
And then my big 100-miler for the years I'm training for, Run Rabbit, in September. And I just
which you have podiumed at before.
hoping to there's a few, I feel like whenever I run a race, there's always sections of a trail that end up sort of like stealing my heart, and I end up like spinning out over them for years, just thinking about like how it would feel better and different to run them better. And so there's a couple sections of that race that I'm really excited to try to run better and differently. And I just, there's nothing quite like running on the Continental Divide in the dark by yourself.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. And remind me, is Run Rabbit Run, is that Estes Park, or where is that? Aspen? Steamboat. They're all the same to me, kind of.
Yeah.
No offense to everybody.
It's the other ski town.
Yeah. Cool. When is Chianti?
March 22nd. So heading over to the continent before long.
Oh man, that really, like, Tuscany, all that is just the best place in the world. The best food. I know.
I'm so pumped to go run some runnable hill.
I didn't even know that there was a race there. That's great. Okay. Kylie, what about you? Like, okay, are you actually an ultra runner? Do you run yourself?
Yeah. I grew up, I ran in college and road ran after college, and then I met my husband and started trail running.
Okay, nice.
And I just got Achilles surgery back in October, so I haven't been running, doing a lot of bike trainer work.
But look out, she's coming back stronger than ever. Brand new Achilles.
Nice, congrats. And where was college? Where did you run in college?
The University of Richmond in Virginia.
Okay, nice.
So small school, ran there, D1, and then did a lot of road running in Boulder after that. So
nice.
But I love the trails the most, even though I haven't gotten to race them a ton. Just with the injury, like the heel injury that I've had. But love running the trails with Zoe and with my husband and my dogs, my Australian Shepherds. I have 3.
Solid. So. All right. So 2025 for you then, maybe not even as a runner, just within your practice, within your business, like what's it shaping up to look like for you? Like, are you taking on more clients? What are you doing?
I actually have a book coming out on March 3rd. Practical fueling for endurance athletes. So that's kind of the big thing, because I've worked on that for 3 years.
Oh, dang.
So that's coming out. And then, doing some Your Diet Sucks things with Zoe, which is really exciting, because I strictly was doing just a lot of one-on-one nutrition coaching, and now kind of like branching into more of the media space. And I've done some freelance writing in the past, but this is kind of an exciting like branch off, which will be
nice.
Really fun to kind of diversify. But yeah, and I'm always doing one-on-one nutrition coaching with athletes, like all ages, abilities, levels, and not just trail runners, triathletes and cyclists and skiers as well. Nice.
Well, thank you both for joining me. It's Your Diet Sucks, anywhere where fine podcasts can be enjoyed. And good luck to you both this year in your endeavors with that new Achilles and Run Rabbit Run and Chianti. It'll be great.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, let's do it again sometime.